So from working with large language models, especially in your console, if you've watched previous videos on this channel, I prefer using the CLI, but I know most users are very familiar with ChatGPT's experience or conversational chat interface, if you will. I came across a project called Chainlit that makes this fairly simple. For this demo, you can see on my screen I have Exa up here. Exa is a company I covered in my previous video using Groq with a combination of Exa's API for search, and it's really helped streamline a lot of more in-depth search queries for specific research I'm conducting or specific results that I'm looking for to get out of certain APIs. And it streamlines a lot of that for the LLM to process that back to the end user. So if you follow along in this video, I'm going to show you how we use Groq API along with accesing API all together in a Chainlit user interface. I have this example code on my GitHub repository. I'll put that inside the description or the comment section, which either or. So just to talk you through what this specific code is going to do and what we're going to demonstrate here is the use of Chainlit. So in my previous video, I showed you how to use function calling with Groq API, or essentially Groq API allows you to have access to Llama 3 models, Mixtral, and the larger Llama 3, I believe that's the 405 billion parameter. So you can customize for whichever model measures your specific use case, if you will. I prefer using Llama 3. It's fairly robust for what I need. It's open source, and all of this is fairly cheap to run if you're going to run it locally. It's practically free, but if you're going to run this in the cloud or something like that, you can package this into a container as well and then build some security around it so you have your own personal LLM, if you will, or a specific chat interface with other APIs and kind of build on top of that. So with that being already out of the bag, if you will, I'm going to run you through this flow. Essentially, the user, this will be us. So similar to how you log into a specific site or a specific user interface to access a large language model like ChatGPT, right? So this can be your openai.com, essentially. Our request that we send in that conversational format will then go to that Groq API. This will determine, based on that user query, it's going to go through an async, and I'll talk through that code in a little bit. Now, depending on the specific query, if I'm looking for something that is not known to the large language model, then it's going to rely on its assistant API, which if you've been around using large language models, typically assistants are really for everything that the frontier or the chat completions won't have on hand, if you will. So it'll rely on assistants, and that's really the part of that function calling, if you will. A lot of agent frameworks will rely on the assistant API, such as Crew.ai and other out there. AutoGen comes to mind. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to keep it simple, straightforward. I'm going to have Exa.ai sitting in the background, and this is essentially going to pull the API when needed to perform any search queries for specific parameters. And I'm going to go through how you can expand that. If you're looking for the most up-to-date information as of today, or maybe you're looking for more historic info, it allows you to set those parameters as well. Okay, so the user will initiate the chat. If it's not known to the model simply, then this will then perform a action, if you will, on behalf to Exa.ai. And then depending on those results back, this will be formatted to the end user. Much more clean compared to when you saw my last video. It's all raw through the console. So let me switch over to the code, and I'll walk through how this comes to life, if you will. Okay, so you should be seeing in Visual Studio the setup here. I've been messing with the Docker file for quite some time to build this out. I was running into numerous issues for specific images I was trying to run. But for simplicity, you can look at my directory here. Now, I'm not going to show the .env file as far as the environment variables. Inside my repository, I keep an example for you so you can run your specific environment in variables. That's the way Chainlit kind of works. So if you see here, this is going to grab our Groq API key. And then we have our JSON, our AST, our OS module. we're calling Groq, which is already installed through the requirements. So you can run your requirements. Notice down low is when we're looking at the terminal specifically, I already have a Chainlit virtual environment configured with all the prerequisite requirements, so it's going to be a pretty easy setup here. So we load our environment variables, if you see up here, and then we essentially initiate an async to Groq, right? So similar to if we were just calling Groq directly instead of an async, you can see here, this will essentially look for the API key, a base URL, etc., right? And then we're going to call our Exa client, and this is really a part of the Exa.ai SDK. So this will essentially call that Exa, and if you can see here, this will have the API, the string, etc. And then we're going to do a max iteration of 5 for here. We're going to instrument OpenAI as far as opening that area here, and then we're going to call our search function here. So similar to my last video, which I demonstrate specifically what I'm looking for when I'm using Exa. So you can look here when we highlight what the search and contents are, a part of that Exa client, and this will look for a number of areas. So we have a number of results. We can include domains, we can exclude domains, we can start the crawl date and the crawl date, start publish date, etc. So you can get very specific, or you can keep this broad. I like to be a little bit more specific depending on what I'm running this for. So if I'm going to look for specific research articles from archive, maybe I want to rely on Bing, Google, New York Times, or something else for some deeper research on a specific subject, then I'm going to include those domains up here, okay? So for this, I'm keeping these specific domains included from that perspective. I don't believe they have an exclude. Let me see here, include. And then I don't have, so just exclude text, okay. And if we notice here, we're going to go through a for loop from our results here. We're going to put in the output list, and then we're going to have this basically as title, link, snippet, score, and then the publish. Now you won't see this to the end user because this is all going to be in a user interface. So once we show that, I will demonstrate specifically what's going on there. Now we have our specific tool that we're initializing. We're defining that as our function. We have our name search, and then I give this just a generic example here, but essentially to use this tool, we're going to need a specific query, right? Search for any query that is not known or understood by the model itself. So now we're going to start our chat session. So Chainlit has this wrapper where it's @CL and then on chat start. So then you can see here we have our out of the box, you're a helpful assistant. If you've messed around with these models before, that's very generic out of the box. And then we have our steps, right? So step type tool async, and then we call our function if it needs to call the tool specifically. And then the function response to grab from the arguments our query, right? And then go through the current step in JSON, and then we append that specifically. So very similar to our last video when we run Groq, and I do have that code inside the same repository under the Groq Exa if you want to look at that as well. So then finally, we have our initialization, if you will, to our Groq model. And this is where it specifies what frontier model we're using. So for this video, we're using Llama 3 8B. Notice that my max tokens are fairly high. And then I have the tools to tools and then tool choice as auto. Now for the response, we have our await. So it's essentially waiting for us to create that specifically. And then you can see we pass in the settings here. This will look fairly similar, right? Our message completions is response choices. So that essentially sanitizes it. And then this will tell you how it runs through the flow of calling that tool specifically, right? Based on the tool call, message history, etc. So if you see me finish off here, and then the on message specifically is essentially running that conversation to the end user, right? So we have our message history that essentially is our query, if you will. That's essentially appended name, user role, user content, and then our message content. And then we're going to go through this while loop here for that, and it's essentially going to answer that user back. So this is this is really refactored from the cookbook, and I'll put the GitHub repo to the official Chainlit cookbook. It's a very cool project. So let me just go right into it to show you what it looks like. So you notice here I run Chainlit run and then the app.py, and then I put a -w and that's essentially a watcher mode, if you will. This is going to take a look at the code specifically, and then it's going to run on our local host. Okay. So now, once this will tell, it will return as well. So it's going to load our .env file. That env file, as stated earlier, is going to essentially pull what is needed to run our specific model, right? So we're going to need an Exa API key. If you don't have that, you want to grab that if you were trying to run this demo, and then the Groq API key as well. Now notice I do have a git ignore. You should never commit your secrets to source control in general. So just as a best practice, I want to call it out because I know there's probably going to be somebody out there that says, I do security, call that out. So in a nutshell, you'll see here this launches our specific, let me change screens now. Okay, so I relaunched the application to demonstrate the use of Exa. So I'm going to use this video to kind of show you what that looks like. So today is August 12th, 2024. Black Hat in Las Vegas just recently completed a few days ago. And we can see here, I asked the large language model, what is the latest summary of news from Black Hat 2024's event in Las Vegas? So I was very explicit to the point for that. And you can see here, this use search, right? So this looks for Black Hat 2024. So it's essentially cleaned that up. Now this will tell you notable talks, expo notes including, and then similar to a query earlier, this is a specific research paper that it looks like the authors presented. Another one was practical attacks against black box code, completion engines, a new attack that allows a attacker to direct code completion engines to generate vulnerable code, a little scary. And then black box access is insufficient for rigorous AI audit. So this probably talks about the need for necessary controls from a auditor perspective, but also visibility to what the specific models can use as far as what we call weights and biases, probably through something of that nature. And it looks like a little bit more. You can see here automated creation of source code variants, a cryptographic hash function, and using pre-trained transformer models. So this is pulling quick information from Black Hat. Now notice that it structured the query a little different than my direct. It just pulled Black Hat 2024 through Exa, and this was the search results. Now I can also ask about other events and see if it's going to give any other information. What information is covered in DEF CON 2024 as far as talks, expo notes, research? So it looks like it's either regurgitated that because it looks like the research itself, it looks like it didn't reach outbound. So this is why you got to test these specific models. But notice here, this is similar to what is known as Black Hat. It wouldn't actually surprise me if some of this might overlap. Expo Notes, the voice privacy challenge, aims to develop voice anonymization systems. That sounds pretty cool. And then LLM safety assessment, code completion engine. So some stuff similar. So it wouldn't actually surprise me if some of these overlap. The only reason I'm a little bit in the blind as far as why I didn't reach out is because typically if it's going to reach out to the assistant, it's going to say search from that perspective. Now notice here on the far right hand side, I can change from dark to light mode, right? So similar to using ChatGPT. I can also open a new chat, right, and start all over again and see if that changes anything. So let me just copy this, open up a new chat. And now I know that I have to start over again. So now it looks like DEF CON 2024 talks. So it looks like it reached out, but it looks like it then didn't return anything meaningful. It looks like it used archive. So you can see here the raw inputs that we put in, right? So this has synthesized the DEF CON 2024 talks, expo notes, and then it's looking for any titles. So this is that raw output that I showed earlier where it has the links, and then this will tell you the score when it was published, right? Secure design for collaboration and semi-value chain. So this looks like it ran through a search likely of this specific query through the specific domains, and then this was the return back. But you can see in real time when it's going to rely on that, as opposed to what can you tell me about cults and the history of cults in California. So now I'm going to rely on its own knowledge, okay? So you can see here, these are some pretty well-known cases. I won't get into, I'm a very neutral person. But if I say, what can you tell me about cults and the history of cults in California? So this is already trained knowledge that the large language model already possesses, right? Because this is historical in the context. So depending where it's pulling that info from, which a lot of these will release if they're open source. If they're closed source, they won't necessarily disclose how they obtain said information. Question mark, right? But if you can see here, the fascination with cults, it gives a breakdown, and the response is fairly quick. Events, influences, and you can see this is talking about some very notable figures, Jim Jones, Charles Manson. I don't go into the history of those things, but just to quickly show you what that is. Now, this demonstration is just to get you up and running, but also to think about if you're trying to use a web user interface for your own ChatGPT experience, if you will. The realm of developing is becoming much more turnkey for a lot of this. Now that I'm going to be making more demos with Chainlit, such as like actions, where I essentially will prompt a specific query, and then based on that query, it will ask for a decision. Do you want to use search or specific tools? And I can obviously expand the tools, so like get weather, get financial information, things like that, to pull some of those syntax out and cover a lot of those use cases. Now again, this might not be the end-all be-all. This is just a very carcass of code. So feel free to use the code as you like, and I will make more content related to this in the future.